War of the Worlds, chaos, madness, or is it? Can't Christians and Mormons get along? They can. Together, we have a special episode with none other than the Stephen Pynakker. In today's program, Stephen Pynakker joins the program from Mormon Book Reviews. Then we'll have a segment called Through Elephant's Eyes, where Stephen and I will talk about our experience making a video together, or rather, we're going to talk about Stephen and kind of his fascination with all things restoration and Mormons. Then we'll get into the trunk treasures, where I pulled up some fun, what'd you call it, comments from the video that we made together. We'll react to those, so stay tuned because you might be on there. You might have a comment that we're going to react to. And then last, we'll get on the breaking news, the Big Ears Bulletin. John Taylor, a fundamentalist's dream. What is this? We'll talk about it, and very exciting to have Stephen Pynakker here on the program. Stephen, moving you over a little bit because I'm a little uncentered, but there we go. That's looking
right.
good. How are you doing?
Doing great. Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, thanks for joining. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So let's see. You just called me out of the blue. I believe Jacob Hansen must have given you my number or something, and we've been kind of chatting ever since. And I've always been a fan of the Mormon book reviews, and so I'm like, yes, this is like, wow, a fun moment for me. But Stephen, you're not a Mormon. You're not a Latter-day Saint. Well, then what the heck are you, and why are you wearing a BYU shirt?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Thanks, first of all, for having me on. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I remember Jacob mentioned something about you and your channel about that. Oh, you were doing that test or whatever that we got to do eventually.
Yeah, we did.
Where to determine what kind of Latter-day Saint you are and stuff like that. And then you and I just started talking, and you told me a little bit about your channel. It was relatively new, and I'm always interested in talking to all the different people in this space, whether they're faithful, they're maybe more scholarly, or maybe they're even antagonistic. I'm honestly one of those people. They call me the Switzerland of Mormonism, where we really truly are the only neutral Mormon podcast, and partly because I don't have an agenda and I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm more interested in about getting people to talk to each other and building bridges between people, and trying to bring unity not only to just different church bodies between the evangelical and the Latter-day Saint world and the Restoration, but also just even people together, even including atheists and people who are ex-Mormons and stuff, and get them at a place at the table that we can have civil conversations.
And if I remember right, first off, you are currently an evangelical Christian. But at one point
Correct.
you had a moment there with atheism. Is that
It was
correct?
more than a moment. It was
More
about
than a
13
moment.
years.
13
Yeah.
years. Okay, that's longer than I thought. But before that, so you were Christian, atheist for 13 years, and now Christian again. Walk us through that experience.
It's really a fascinating story, and I've told the story in a few places, including the final episode I was on Mormon Stories with John DeLynn, where it was titled "How Mormonism Saved an Evangelical's Life." Yes,
yep.
On Mormon Stories.
Yep.
Core Horse channel himself let me praise Mormonism and the Church of Jesus
Christ. And that
Christ.
was a few years ago when he was supposedly more friendly. I don't know. I haven't seen much positive stories lately, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just not following closely enough. But anyway,
I think John has different seasons and stuff like that. But like Jacob Hansen admitted on his program, and him and I have talked about it extensively on the phone, that he said he does not believe that John DeLynn is trying to destroy the church, nor does he think he hates the church, but he thinks he's trying to reform the church in his best way and wants to help it. So that's what Jacob Hansen says. So to me, it's like,
and Jacob Hansen's right about everything. So
right. But my point is, if Jacob Hansen can have that position, then people like on the far conservative, like TBM community, need to hear that. Because I tell people, see, that's what I've been trying to tell people all along, because I got to see that side of John DeLynn.
I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Yeah, okay. So you got to see that side of John DeLynn. Yeah, and that's why I think your channel is so important, because you're like the one person that everyone talks to. You know, you have even just recently, there was talks on Twitter between, I think, Jacob Hansen and Cultural Hall about maybe getting together, and it's like, well, let's get Stephen Pynakker. He's the middleman. He's willing to talk to
Yeah,
everyone. But
it's that often does happen frequently. It happens a lot behind the scenes that people never know about either.
yeah, and then
So
some of it doesn't come to fruition, and maybe some of
no,
it will in the future. So I don't want to say anything too much.
yeah,
But at the same time, so you're kind of beloved by all these groups, but you also have a lot of haters, unfortunately, because you also have haters within each of those groups who are like, well, you're not on our side, which is funny because I started seeing that a little bit firsthand with some of the comments on the video we made together. And we'll get into those a little bit later. I think some of them were kind of funny. People are like, oh, Stephen, he's just blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, well, why can't we have, this is why we can't have nice things, I suppose, because, you know, when someone nice comes along, has an actual neutral channel that's not a Latter-day Saint, but is like talking to all kinds of members, like you said, in or out of the church at all kind of levels of the spectrum of faith, and we can't, like, we can't accept that. It's like, come on.
right. Well, and honestly, I think a lot of the criticism comes from people who don't even watch the channel. They just see the
Or the video,
title,
yeah.
or they see the guest, or they see the thumbnail, and they just immediately assume a lot of things. And usually when people attack me, it's done out of ignorance. It's
Yeah.
like if you actually spend some time, even just a little bit of time, watching my program or watching my appearances on other places, you would understand that I don't have an agenda. And I've had many people who said when I first came on the scene, they thought, okay, who's this guy? What's he all about? Well, now everybody knows that, that I am friendly. It doesn't mean that I'm not critical, nor does it mean I don't have critics. I mean, early days when the church finances stuff became a big story, I had one of the first whistleblowers from Canada come on. So I'm not one of those people that, oh, we're just going to do everything that's all hunky dory nice. No, I'm going to have critics on, but I'm also going to have evangelicals on, and that also maybe are more favorable to the church, like Jeff McCullough and David Boyce, of course, before he joined your church, and then Dr. Kyle Bashirs, Dr. Christopher Thomas, who just recently stepped down as the chairman of the Book of Mormon Studies Association. He's a well-regarded Pentecostal theologian, and just talk to all these different types of people and have more civil conversations, and just I want people to see that what I really enjoyed about the video. And I know we're going to talk about that, but the whole are Mormons Christians question, right? I really was glad that you included myself, and then you included Pastor Jeff, and then you included Dallas Jenkins, because we all were singing from the same hymnal. We're in one accord with each other. And I think all three of us independently got there through our interactions with Latter-day Saints.
Mm-hmm.
And like I tell people, and I remember telling David Boyce this back when he was still on Team Protestant, before he teamed the Trader and became Team Restoration, I remember we were talking, I said, David, the advantage that you and I have is, unlike the haters of the church, in particular the evangelical apologists, or those clowns that stand out with their signs during general conference, or during a temple dedication, or at a pageant.
Yeah.
I said, unlike them, we get to see the pearls of the restoration.
Yeah.
And once you see the pearls, you can't unsee them. And that's what we get to see. So people aren't going to put their pearls out to people that are haters, but they will share them to people like Jeff and I and Dallas and David and others. And I think that's really, really important to understand, that you don't really understand Mormonism until you've seen the whole parts of it. If you're just looking at the negative, you're only going to see the negative. Like I tell people, so if you're just looking for the devil in the details, you're going to find the devil. But I say, you also need to look for the Jesus.
Yeah.
And also do that too.
That is a perfect segue into our first segment. This segment is called Through Elephant's Eyes. Let's get it. All right, so the Through Elephant's Eyes. So we did make this video together, but before we get too much into the video, I did title this something about this Christian loves Mormons or something to that effect. And I kind of want to get more into that side. Okay, you obviously you made this video with me. You talked about just barely seeing the pearls, seeing the Jesus as opposed to the devil in the details, which I really like that. But the question begs the question is, why are you so interested in the first place?
Oh yeah, I
Why
guess
are
that was your
you
original question.
why are you an evangelical? No, that's good. Now, why are you an evangelical that like most evangelicals don't really care? I don't know. Maybe I am misrepresenting here, but like you seem obviously to care a lot more than others. You have a
Yeah.
channel called Mormon Book Reviews.
Right. I think most evangelicals who care in one sense are more like, okay, we got to save their souls because they're heading straight to hell.
Exactly.
The
Which I
the
appreciate,
rest,
by the way, because you know, if you
right?
really
Yeah,
believe
I get that.
that I'm going to
If you
hell,
really believe that,
then please,
fair enough.
yes,
I agree. Um, Unfortunately, the tactics they use cause people when that general conference, when they're seeing those clowns and those yahoos or seeing the stuff they're saying online, the people are walking to their general conference and be like, you know what, if I were to ever leave my church, I would certainly not join their church. So I think they need to reconsider their tactics. But I
yeah,
would say, yeah. And
true.
then the vast majority of evangelicals would be indifferent or not even really know anything about your church other than maybe the God Makers cartoon or stuff that's been influenced by the God makers. And so the reality is
It
it's a
seems
very
like
superficial.
a
Yeah,
lot has been influenced by that video because even in this video, there's people commenting things that I'm like, man, I can't believe people still believe this. But maybe I'm in an
right.
echo chamber a little bit because I consume a lot of Latter-day Saint content online. It just seems crazy to me that people would still believe some of that stuff. Which, speaking of which, did you ever you were going to make a reaction video?
Yeah. So actually, what happened was the whole, when we're going to talk about the whole John Taylor thing, but a few things happened
Oh,
where
yeah, yeah.
basically we're going to do a panel discussion with a group of people, which would include evangelicals, fundamentalists, Mormons, and other different.
Fundamentalists in there too, huh?
Oh, gotta have my favorite Benjamin Schaefer of the
Okay,
Righteous Branch
Schaefer.
on. Man, he's the like I say, the Ogden Kraut of the 21st century, the man who puts fun in Mormon fundamentalism. Gotta have Benjamin Schaefer.
Oh, man.
And so we're going to put together a panel discussion about the God Makers cartoon. And actually I've talked to Jacob about it, and Kyle Bashir's actually wrote an article Substack about it, and then of course I saw that Jacob did like a little response to it. But yeah, I'm hoping to put together a panel discussion and actually watch the cartoon and comment and do commentary on it. So I think that'd be fun.
I'm a little nervous because you at one point mentioned that there was like a faithful Latter-day Saints who were like, yeah, this actually isn't that bad. I'm like, who are these people? Like, what the
We'll
heck,
find
man? Like, I don't know. It's kind of funny because, you know, as much as like there's certain things that I think are just like kind of make me roll my eyes when evangelicals bring up, there are Latter-day Saints who do believe those things, you know,
Mhm.
and probably a lot more than I would like to admit, like things that I either find repugnant or I just don't believe. And the doctrine itself, I think, is more wide open than what maybe others would think. You know, there's a lot of like diversity of thought even within, you know, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Diversity of practice. Somebody's putting together a panel discussion with like five. I've already had one panel discussion with some women, I've got like 5 or 6 LDS women that want to bring back polygamy. But I also hear from people in your church that say, "Well, we practice the principles secretly." So
Yes,
I
that's
think
a big, well, that's a problem. The church
I
famously
don't
has
get it.
some kind of like office in the church office building that's like designed. It's like this secret. I don't know. Like some of the media has like talked about. It's like this secret. You probably know more about it than I do. Like they're trying to find the secret polygamists among them. You know, it's crazy though. And I know we'll get into polygamy a little bit later because we're going to talk a little bit about the John Taylor stuff, which can be fun. I attended my mom's board back in Utah about a year or so ago, or maybe it was longer than that. Point is, we were talking about polygamy as part of the lesson. And there's people in there who stood up and remembered. This one lady in particular stood up and was like, yeah, I remember my grandpa, you know, he was a polygamist, and she kind of talked about some of the blessings and the struggles with polygamy. But it just reminded me that like we're not that far off from when this happened. You know, like this lady's an older lady, but like it was her grandpa was a polygamist. That's not that long ago. And it's still kind of in the church today. Anyway, we'll get into that a little bit later. But diversity of thought, yeah, the secret polygamist though. Yeah, I guess diversity in the sense that some people are at higher states of apostasy than others, right? Just kidding. in some ways, I guess we're all kind of we're not all living up to what we should. But yeah, polygamy shouldn't be lived today. Anyway, I don't want to like get it too in front of it. Let's get back to okay. So making this video, you got good old Gordon B. Hinckley at the front. I put a talk from his at the very beginning that I really love. It's called My Testimony. If anyone wants to check out the whole thing. Uh, Meanwhile, Glenna Anderson says, "Please, can you please ask your guests to stop calling us Mormons?" Well, Glenna, a lot of times what Stephen's doing is because Mormons, I think, is a word that refers to all levels of the restoration, and I think that's what Stephen's doing. So I don't think he's trying to be mean or anything, right, Stephen?
Of course, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
well,
it's
first of all,
fine.
like I'm a member and I attend the Mormon History Association.
Right.
I deal with Mormon scholars all the time. I have Mormon in my name, but also I tell people, I said, throughout the years, I watched so much stuff on YouTube about Mormonism around the time that they were launching this multi-million-dollar campaign, I Am a Mormon.
Yeah.
And so I tell people, so if the church wants to pay for me for the therapy, for me to quit calling them Mormons, I literally kind of felt like I was being brainwashed because every other commercial is, I'm a Mormon, I'm a Mormon. Now I can't say they're a Mormon.
Yeah, yeah. It's a habit, it's hard to break habits. I will say though, so I was all in on the I'm the Mormon campaign. Me and my buddy had profiles somewhat popular because we had somewhat of a presence in that space on YouTube back in the day. And it was fun. I liked the Mormon profile and whatnot. But I got to tell you, because of the other Mormon sects, if you will, the other restoration movements, I am all for not calling members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Mormons anymore. In fact, in that sense, I'm an ex-Mormon, right?
Right. Or
Because
anti-Mormon.
or anti-Mormon. Well, I don't think I'm anti because I
Well,
really
you're
love and
opposed to
appreciate.
you're opposed to calling it, so you're
Yeah.
anti.
Right, right. So I like Latter-day Saint. I'm all for that. I also like it too because, I'm in the camp of, I mean, obviously from the video, I want to be called Christian. I want to be associated, like, I want, if someone comes down and says, separate by religions, Christians over here, non-Christians over here, I'm going to the Christian side, okay? Even if you guys don't want me over there, I'm going over this, because, and I kind of think the Latter-day Saint, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints moves us a little bit more towards that. So I think there's benefits there. I think there's benefits because of, like we talked about, the other restoration movements. They're Mormons too because they believe in the Book of Mormon, but we're not the same, so we don't want to be lumped in with them. We don't want to be lumped in with fundamentalists who are practicing polygamy at this point when we are no longer doing that in this life. ... And we don't want to be associated with not Jesus Christ. So yeah, Latter-day Saint. I like that a lot better. So thank you, Glenna, for bringing that up. But yeah, I'm not like again, Stephen. One thing I think people should appreciate about you is your willingness to talk to all restoration movements, not just Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You talk to Church of Jesus Christ, which is the Bickertonites. You talk to the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
Community of
the
Christ.
Community of Christ, the Reformed.
You name them. I've had Denver Snuffer on. I've had many polygamists come on the program. So I do talk to everybody. And so I kind of look at the restoration and Mormonism as being like, you have Catholicism, you have Protestantism, and then you have restorationism. And
Yeah.
there's actually restorationism even within the evangelical tradition,
that's true.
as well. Not only in the 19th century with the Stone Campbellite movement, but even with the born again Christian movement and the charismatic and Pentecostal movements, were also, consider themselves to be restorationists as well, because they're
Yeah.
restoring things back to the church.
Yep. So I guess the distinguishing factor would be Latter-day Saint movements, I think is the
Yeah.
category for.
Latter-day Saint movement, Smith-Rigdon movement, as Steve Shields likes to call it. So yeah.
So Stephen, what was your reaction to President Gordon B. Hinckley at the beginning of the video? I just want to see what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I thought it was very positive. I think just by watching his speech to General Conference that he has a very sincere faith, and that seemingly Jesus does play a major role in his life, and he does think very highly of him, and then just described about what kind of role he plays in his life and what kind of relationship he has with him. And I found that to be very touching and very compelling.
Yeah, I thought so too. It's one of my favorites. Again, it's called My Testimony. Um, Gordon B. Hinckley's a good guy, and that's really what I get from it too. There's a lot of sincerity. I feel he gets a little emotional at one point, which
Hmm.
is not typical of uh, President Gordon B. Hinckley. So he was the prophet of the church at the time when he was giving that talk. He died in, what was it, 2008, I believe. Then we had President Monson and then President Nelson. But I understand that you've been following and been interested and fascinated with the church, the Mormon, the Latter Day Saint movements for a long time. So had you been, you knew who President Hinckley was, I'm guessing, before,
Oh yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Certainly. Oh yeah.
certainly,
No, I
yeah.
remember watching his interview on Larry King.
Yeah, yeah. Did you watch it live? Are you that?
Yep.
Oh, nice. Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, okay. Is that what so what started it all for you then?
Um, well, it started 8 years old. We were staying at a Marriott hotel, and I came across a Book of Mormon, um, and I
Wow.
was intrigued by the whole thing. I thought, wow, this looks just like our Bible. And then I saw the Arnold Freiberg paintings, which were very fascinating to me. And that's really what planted the seed. And then I've just had a lifetime journey with restoration.
And then if I remember correctly, you had this fascination, but you actually didn't know any members of the church.
I didn't know anybody from in the church when I started my channel. I
Up
didn't know a
until you
Latter Day
started your
Saint.
channel. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's pretty crazy to think.
Yeah. Now, in the past, have I had interactions with some here and there? Yes.
Yeah.
But did I actually have like friends, people I knew that I was close to that I got to know? No.
Yep.
So this was really my first foray into this thing, and I started going on Reddit, and before I started my channel, and just started communicating with people, saying, "Hey, I'm going to be starting this channel." And then next thing you know, the first contact I ever had with Latter Day Saint, the person wanted to share me a vision that they had, a dream vision. I'm like, okay, this is strap your boots on, Steve. It's going to be a wild ride. The very first Latter Day Saint that I talked to tells me about a dream vision they had. So where Moroni appeared to them. So that's my first conversation with Latter Day Saint, who would then later go on Rod Meldrum's program to tell his story.
Oh, really? So it's publicly available then?
Yep. Hmm.
Oh, interesting. I might have to look into that one. All right, so now let's get to the segment where we're going to react to some of the feedback we got from making this video together. I had a lot of fun making it, Steve, by the way, so thanks. We got to do like a full interview. Not all of it made it in there. We'll talk about maybe where you can find the whole interview here in a second. But let's get to the next segment. Okay, before we get completely into the next segment, I need to remind everyone the purpose of this channel, which is to elevate members of the church by building bridges of understanding through fun and informative content. The church, meaning the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in case anyone was wondering. And point number 2 is to help honest actors to take the church seriously by exposing limitations of critics and correcting misconceptions. If you like that, you can always be a supporter of the channel. Let's take a look at some of the members. We have Pachyderm members, Jacob and Curious Madcat. Thank you for helping make this possible. And we have one Mammoth member, always searching for further light and knowledge. Thank you for all that you do in participating in EthersElephant, both the Pachyderm and Mammoth members. You're awesome. All right, let's get into some of the feedback on this video. So first, uh, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you experienced this, Steve. Steven. I like to call you Steven. Do you like to be called Steve or Steven?
Either one's fine.
Okay, Steven. Where I don't know, my videos kind of get the waves. So like initially I get my subscribers to watch. It's all very positive. And then after a while, the algorithm takes it to people who are like, I want to hate watch that thing, which is kind of fun. So let's take a look at this first one here. I'll ask what your reaction is to it, and then I'll offer some thoughts. Holly Evildemiro off 131. There's no spaces, so I don't know what that's trying to say. But that's the name. It says, quote, Mormonism is not a Christian religion. They believe Jesus is created. They do not believe in the true Trinity. They sound like a Christian, but they deceive you by not telling you their true beliefs and doctrine. Your reaction to that, Stephen?
Well, and we've talked about this. Is Mormonism creedal Nicene Christianity that would be in line with Orthodox Catholicism and Protestant views on the Godhead and the nature of God? No, they're not Orthodox Christians. I refer to them as heterodox Christians, which I think is fair because they're not
Yeah.
Trinitarian as well. Now it says that believe that Jesus was created. No, actually, they believe Jesus was an eternal person. They
Yeah.
believe
I'm,
so.
I'm glad you
As I
brought
say
that
that
up.
that the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus was created, but actually, and it's weird because he was created, but also he was the Archangel Michael. So he kind of had a pre-existence as well as Michael. But yeah, that's where you get like, oh, they say Jesus is created. That's where you see like the conflation of Jehovah's Witnesses or other groups into your theology, which
Yeah.
so happen often so happens
Yeah.
happens so often.
The Trinity thing, they're correct about that. The Jesus is created is my biggest beef there because I don't know. That's not true. They deceive you by not telling you their true beliefs and doctrine. I don't know. I think there's a. I would disagree with that. I think the members of the church are eager to tell their beliefs. I don't think they're like
Yeah,
trying to make it.
I I think it's interesting because now that the internet's come out and Mormon doctrine and is out there, especially deep Mormon doctrine. I literally have had topics where we go and talk about deep Mormon doctrine,
Yeah.
like get deep into it, right? I had a guy wrote a book 4 or 5 years, about 3 years ago called Deep Mormon Doctrine, and we went and our Mormon doctrine, we went and did some really deep diving into stuff that's really like the meat as opposed to the milk. So even as an outsider, just to kind of explore these concepts and ideas. But yeah, the thing is about it though too is the Latter-day Saints Church does try to present itself more as like a mainstream Christian religion that started with David O. McKay's Correlations in the 1950s, where he's like, okay, guys, we're going to shave off all our beards and we're going to
Clean cut.
correlate history, and we're going to try to fit into 1950s mainline Protestantism. And in many ways, they were effectively able to do that. And what we're seeing now, like with using the cross more, emphasizing Easter more, instead of having the angel Moroni on the Google Maps, they replaced it with a cross. So we're seeing like, it's kind of a change. It's like they're changing their image, but they still have their doctrine. And so that's where I think it's really important. We do talk about the differences, but I don't think anymore it's necessarily fair to say that they're deceiving people. I think they're just like, it's the same. It's like, it would be like trying to talk about different doctrines, deep doctrines of Christianity to a baby Christian. Like they're just not going to get it, and they're
Yeah.
still learning. And so I think that it's not fair to say deception. But then again, there's deception in all different types of religion too. So let's be fair about that too.
That's true. And hold on.
Or deceptive practices, right? Like, when the baseball baptisms in the early 60s, right? In England. I mean,
Or basketball or soccer,
yeah,
depending on the
there was,
area.
yeah, there's no doubt deceptive tactics happen, but I can tell you deceptive tactics happen in just about any proselytizing group.
Yeah, I think that's right. But yeah, I think overall though, I don't think hold on. I changed that inappropriately. Okay, here we go. Oh, I have all the ones appearing behind it. Okay, well, I'll just do this. Next one. This person clearly didn't watch the video. I don't think they just clicked on it because of my claim at the beginning. They say, no, they're not. They believe the Bible is outdated and misogynistic, so they need the Book of Mormon. Outdated and misogynistic, is that your experience with why Latter-day Saints have the Book of Mormon?
Absolutely. That's comes from a place of total ignorance, and I don't even think it's worthy of a comment.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Okay, there's some more positive ones coming up, I think. Question to LDS. I'm a creedal Christian who has a testimony of Jesus as my savior and love Heavenly Father. Can I call myself a Mormon? Or are y'all gatekeeping the term? I thought this was a fun one to bring up because, you might, it's an interesting criticism. It's like, well, like you guys want to be called Christians, but what if we want to be called Mormons? It's like, well,
And you're like, but we don't want to be called Mormons anymore. We want to be called Christians.
exactly. Well, we don't want to be called Mormons anymore. And first off, do you really want to be called Mormon? Because I don't think you do. But the funny thing, it's like, well, it's pretty simple, right? Mormon meaning believe the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Christian would be you believe the authenticity of Christ, as far as I'm concerned. So if you believe in the Book of Mormon, yeah, like even if you're not part of the church, is kind of getting our discussion earlier. There are a lot of Mormons who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who belong to different sects, or maybe are just Mormon because they believe in the Book of Mormon. Now, I would hesitate to call someone like who doesn't believe in the Book of Mormon a Mormon. Like I know some people who have left the church want to be called Mormons for whatever reason because they feel like they're a cultural Mormon. And I don't know, like as long as you guess you put the word cultural in front of it every time, then maybe that makes sense. Same with like a Christian, like it's like Stephen, or no, what's the guy's name? Oh my gosh, I'm just forgetting the famous atheist who recently was like, "I'm a cultural Christian."
Oh yeah, Richard Dawkins.
Richard
And I was just
Dawkins. Thank you so
I
much.
was actually I was actually talking on the phone with Colby Reddish about it tonight,
Oh yeah,
and I was just like, we were talking about it. I said, 20 years ago, I would have never in a million years
yeah,
would have expected to hear Richard Dawkins call himself not only say that he is a cultural Christian, but he's glad he lives in the Christian culture, Christian nation.
yeah,
So for me, it's like that's the equivalent of a born again experience, as far as I'm concerned.
yeah. I mean, he won't agree with that, and he still says he's an atheist, but like at least
Well,
he sees the
when
fruits.
I say that, he was probably of all the four horsemen, and he was probably the most uh, angry and antagonistic towards religion and Christianity.
Yeah,
So to imagine, like, if you were to ask people back then, 20 years from now, which one of these guys would call themselves a cultural Christian, you probably would have guessed the three others before you would have guessed
yeah,
Richard Dawkins.
uh, yeah, which is pretty wild. And so, like in the same sense, though, that I mean, maybe you call him a Christian too, but like because he's more of a cultural one, I wouldn't call like people like John DeLynn. I know he likes to sometimes say he's Mormon still or whatever because of the cultural part, but I would say no, he's culturally maybe. But you got to have that clarifier, I think. But yeah, Jeremiah Collins 9630. If you believe in the Book of Mormon, you can absolutely be called a Mormon as far as I'm concerned, though I don't think you would want to. All right, this one I thought was kind of funny. Pastor Jeff talks so much but says absolutely nothing, coming from Victor 702. I thought it was a funny critique because Pastor Jeff is very calculated in what he's saying in some of these clips. And I watch so much Pastor Jeff trying to get good clips of him like talking about this question about are Latter-day Saints or Mormons Christians. And he's right because he doesn't really say it. I mean, he agrees definitely, I think, a lot with both you and the creator of The Chosen, but he's a little bit more like dancing around it because I think he has a definition, which I'm fine with because I appreciate a lot of the stuff he
Well,
does say.
but also too, just so you understand, you have to understand that he is actually a credentialed minister with a
Yes, that's
Christian
true.
denomination. So in many ways, he has to be careful in things he says. He has told me things off the record that he hasn't said on air. I'll just say that, and I'll say that said the same things to him. So him and I have a close enough relationship where we talk very openly about these kind of things, and we talk good, bad, ugly, everything. We're very interested in the people of the Restoration, and we really have a heart for the people.
Yeah, that's great, and I really really like that about both of you. I want to talk to Pastor Jeff at some point. I'm planning on it. We'll see if that ever happens.
Let me know if I can hook you up.
Sounds good. Kiori, I saw you in the chat and you had the top comment on the video, so we had to include it, Kiori. It says, I can't answer whether organization X or denomination Y is a Christian. The most important question I can ask myself is, am I a Christian? Your thoughts, Stephen?
I think that's a very fair question to ask, and honestly, I think that's I think people need to be more concerned about their relationship with the Savior than other people's relationship with the Savior. Are you in line? Are you in line with Scripture? Are you in line with Christ? Is he doing the work through you, or are you just trying to do the work yourself? Um, are you following the principles of the peacemaker? Are you following him? Are you turning the other cheek? Are you willing to give up everything to serve him? Uh, so that's why I look for the fruits in people. I don't look for what they say doctrinally, what they believe. I think it's really important. It's like, am I following in the footsteps of Christ? And I think everybody who's a Christian and a follower of Yeshua should ask themselves that question every day.
Yep. I totally agree. And any last words before we get into our next segment here?
Well, it was fun to respond to some of those comments, and appreciate you
Yeah.
putting them out there.
Yeah, I think that was a pretty good sample of where everyone was. I think what Kiori was saying was kind of like the initial punch of people. Then you had like some kind of like hard-leaning Christians, I think that joined on last second just to react to the title because I called it. I
Yeah,
said yes, Mormons are Christians. Yeah, you know what? And in the video, I actually say Mormons may or may not be Christians. And I think part of that, me saying that, is because I think it's true because I think Mormons, as we've talked, encompasses a lot of different people, and
yeah,
and even if you're a member of the church, you might not be a Christian. I think that's
right.
true. Uh,
Absolutely. And
so
I would say that about all different groups. I think it's really important that we put aside what building people go to on Sunday or Saturday or wherever, and just see if the Savior is operational in their lives.
yeah,
That's really what you got to look for. By their fruits, you will know them.
yeah. Okay. And real quick though, before we move on, so I mean, both you and Pastor Jeff have both mentioned that you have kind of like this special love for Mormons, for Latter Day Saints. You both have channels as evangelicals dedicated towards Latter Day Saints, which is really nice. And you both have talked about there's a lot of positives to learn from Latter Day Saints and what they do, and you can bring that back and forth. Well, I think likewise, the other side of that coin is I think there's a lot of wonderful things that the Christians do, evangelicals do, that Latter day Saints could learn from. And that's something that I do want to explore more and more into the future. That's some of the conversation I want to have more with you, with Pastor Jeff, because there's certain things that I have a deep appreciation for. On my mission, I served down in Chile. And in Chile, you have a lot of Catholics and you have a lot of evangelicals, but it's a very Christian society.
A lot of
Absolutely
Pentecostals, a lot of Pentecostals too, right?
Pentecostal. Yeah, every type of Protestantism is down there essentially.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
it's true.
and it's funny because like most of the people who were serious about their faith were Protestant evangelicals. I talked to only a few Catholics who actually like believed in it. Most of them were like, just no, it's tradition. I'm Catholic,
Mhm.
diet Catholic. But the few Catholics I did talk to were great experiences. But point is I really developed a love for the people down there, and likewise loved talking to the Christians down there. Wonderful experience, and I don't know, my perspective. Maybe I'm an optimistic guy. I guess I don't know. My perspective is to always look at like where we agree on and what we can amplify about the things we do agree on, which is so much more than I think what people like to admit on the internet, at least. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that. I think there's so much to that Latter Day Saints can also learn from Christians and evangelical Protestants and Catholics even. And so I hope that what you guys are doing is so good to kind of change the narrative about discussing between Mormons and Christians online. That I hope that can be reciprocated in the other direction as much as possible too, because I think we're all just trying to seek Jesus, right? And we have different understandings of like different natures of Christ and all that, and the Trinity, obviously. But like, I think at the end of the day, and you can totally disagree with me on this. In fact, I asked you this in the interview. At the end of the day, I think fundamentally, a lot of us are the same religion, which is we're seeking after Jesus Christ. And I know people might disagree with me on that, but I think that's something to consider. And we're all at like different places in that seeking of Christ, right? I'm where I'm at in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because I think that's where I find him. Anyway, I'm talking a lot. Any thoughts there?
Well, I think, it's interesting because, Jeff is a pastor and I'm just a lay person who's just like a geek of Mormon history and culture.
A
And,
layperson with a camera and a YouTube channel. So
yes. Yeah. And honestly, I didn't expect to have the impact on this community that I've had. I really thought I'd just have a small little book review channel with a few hundred subscribers, but I got on a lot of people's radar screens really fast. And, you know, uh, just have all these connections with all these different restoration groups and connections in the church office building and in different
Yeah.
departments in the church and at Brigham Young University. So I'm privy to a lot of inside information and that a lot of people just aren't aware of. And some of those stories end up being broken, like the sale of the Kirtland Temple was broken on my channel last year. And
Yeah, I was gonna
but
bring
also,
that up. I'm like, do people realize that you broke that? I'm
yeah,
pretty sure the church was waiting to announce that until General Conference, and then
yeah.
they couldn't anymore because Steve Pynakker with that Mormon book reviews came out and said, "Oh, they're buying it."
And it's
So
because of my relationship with all the different branches of the restoration
yeah,
that enabled that, because it was a Strangite, John Hychek, who was the one that had that information. He said, "How would you like to break one of the biggest stories in the history of the uh, uh,
restoration.
restoration?"
Yeah, yeah,
And I was sitting there like, heck yeah. And then just to have that moment where you realize that you're one of the few people on the planet that knows something that millions are going to find out very shortly, and to just be that's going to affect people's lives, that's going to make people very excited, but it's also going to devastate the people in the community of Christ, which it did.
yeah,
So it was a roller coaster. And then later the night I actually went on Greg Mattson's show, The Quick Show, to kind of talk about it as well. So yeah, that was crazy to be in a 50-year-old mobile home, lives with their mom, and have that story. But then even since then, we've broken other stories,
yeah,
as well. And so we have become a clearinghouse of information, and I'm sitting on a lot of information too.
yeah. In fact, there's some information that was somewhat new that you were talking about on your channel, which is our next segment. This segment is called the Big Run. All right, you saw it in the thumbnail. This is supposed to be John Taylor holding a cross with two polygamous wives, and this is what AI created. Which,
Okay, I figured that. I was thinking, I'm pretty sure that's AY generated. I would have that like front and center if I had a prophet holding a cross in your restoration.
hey, well, the cross is interesting. I understand that we actually used it up until for a while, but in Utah there was like disagreements between the Catholic groups and the church, and that's when they decided, we're just not going to use it as much anymore because the
So then
first
what's interesting.
presidency. Oh, real quick. The first presidency, from what I understand, was going to put a giant cross up on the Ensign Peak, is what it's known as
Mhm.
today. And that was gonna happen, and then they just scrapped it, and they said, we'll let the cross be the Catholics thing. We're gonna not stick with it. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
It's interesting. I know that there was a proposal to put it up on Ensign's Peak,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that was really fascinating. But if you look at old photos of Brigham Young's wives, they were all wearing crosses,
Yeah, yeah. It was a
and it
thing.
wasn't. And what it was is really it was part of David O. McKay's correlation. So essentially, I come from a Christian Reformed tradition that really kind of wasn't too crazy about people wearing crosses as well. So this isn't entirely an anti-Catholic thing. There were a lot of Protestants that kind of felt the same way, that the cross was kind of too Catholic. And
Yeah.
so in order for David O. McKay to try to mainstream Latter-day Saints, I think he wanted to move it away from any imagery that might be associated with like Catholicism. So I think you saw kind of a couple different interesting things going on back then.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it was overall a smart move to be distinguished, but now it's kind of interesting because it does seem like we're kind of coming back a little bit in the sense where we were like, no, we're not the same Christian churches you've heard of. We're different, and now we're kind of like, well, we're similar, but we got more books. But yeah, okay, so yeah, this John Taylor thing. If someone just woke up yesterday, a member of the church, and they're like, John Taylor, I haven't heard of his name for a long time. Like, when has he been relevant? He's the third prophet of the church. Why is everyone talking, Stephen, about President John Taylor, third prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Well, for a long time, the church denied that this revelation actually existed. In 1933, June of 1933, they even declared it to be a pretended revelation.
Quote
So you
unquote.
have, yep. So you have quotes from the church basically saying that this is not true. It's pretend. It's made up. And you have this other line of people who are firm believers in the principle. And keeping in mind that I've been in touch with what's his name? The apostle that was baptizing people in Mexico, their grandson, Anthony. Anthony.
Anthony, I don't know who you're talking about.
Well, either way, he was an apostle in the church, and he was baptizing people in Mexico, and he was telling them, he says, no matter what happens, whatever you hear, you're to continue this principle, no matter what you hear from in the States, what's going on.
Yeah.
So, and this is post manifesto baptisms happening. This is like in the 1900s, early 1900s. There's still people are still being taught that they need to go and practice the principle. Even post manifesto 1890, Brigham Young's son was taking wagon trains, advertising in the paper, "Hey, let's all go down to Mexico and get sealed to your plural wives." So this was happening 1890 after, okay, and this was very open. So basically, there's this idea. So basically, the thing is, in 1886, a year before John Taylor dies, he's on the run. He's on the lam because the feds are going after him. Why? Because he's practicing and advocating the principle, which is what all the leadership was doing, and they were all on the lam. And he wrote down this revelation that essentially said that it's an eternal principle, and that we're referring to polygamy as being an eternal principle. Now, why isn't polygamy in there? Well, during this period of time, they're being hunted down. Probably better not to have coded words, but we know the eternal principle and stuff was referring to polygamy
You're
at the
talking
time.
about it said, it doesn't actually say the words plural marriage. It says
Right.
everlasting covenant.
Everlasting covenant, all these kind of things, which they would have understood as referring to plural marriage. People in that period of time. If you look at the reception history, that audience that would have seen that or during that period of time would have understand what he was saying. So people who try to say, well, plural marriage or polygamy is not mentioned, well, it didn't have to be. They understood what that was. So essentially, this is a revelation said in the first person, "Thus saith the Lord." Okay, these are the words of God, and basically says that this principle is to continue no matter what. And then, of course, he dies a year later, and then 4 years after he wrote that revelation, the church did the 1890 manifesto, essentially saying that we no longer practice the principle. So what happens is that you have all these people saying that, well, we got Taylor's thing. Even Taylor's son
Yeah.
was communicated, and he was a member of the Quorum of the 12.
Hmm.
He was excommunicated because he was showing his letter saying, "My dad, we got to continue this." So they all understood what this revelation meant and what the implications were, and even his son did. And so that there were people that were told and there's claims made by fundamentalists that they were the people that started Mormon fundamentalism were there, like the Mussers, and they were basically given this special important role to continue the principle no matter what. And so that's where the fundamentalists feel that that's their birthright to practice this principle, to keep it alive, because it's an eternal principle and it needs to continue forth. And so they've done this, but then throughout the years, as they start to separate, because remember, before 1890, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was a Mormon fundamentalist church in that they were practicing the principle. And then slowly but surely, as time progresses, now we get into the 1920s and 1930s. At first, they were saying, well, you can no longer do sealings. Okay, then you can get excommunicated. And then by the 1930s, if you were practicing the principle, you could get excommunicated. So slowly but surely, during this period of a couple decades, we're seeing these groups split off. And then from the Brighamite branch or Utah branch, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they're basically now saying that this was not a true revelation. This was a pretended revelation. And the fundamentalists maintained all along, no, it was a true revelation, and we're following the prophet. So as these groups get further and further apart, and this idea is like, oh, these fundamentalists are whack jobs, they're making this stuff up. Well, now when that letter, so Christina Rosetta, my friend, somebody from Church History Library sent her a link and said, check this out. Now, Christine is another person who's an outsider. She's actually raised Pentecostal, is now a Catholic, and she's a leading Mormon studies character with polygamy, since somewhat retired from that. But she saw this and understood the significance of it. And so she sent it out to her polygamous friends, and they were spiking the football, because it's like, yes, finally,
We
we
knew
get
all
vindicated.
along.
We
Yeah.
knew all along that we're practicing what the prophet wanted us to do. And so that to them was a big deal. They were spiking the football. My phone was ringing off the hook, like, Steve, I can't believe this. This was a huge deal to them. And
Just because they
it
published it on, because the church didn't give any commentary to it, right? They just published
you know,
the file.
you understand, for years, people have been begging the church to put this out. And it's officially now in the church catalog, says 1886 revelation of John Taylor. Even says it's a revelation.
Well,
Small r, small r.
small r, yeah.
But
Well,
but
yeah.
but but I'm just saying to the people, especially the people in the fundamentalist communities, this was a watershed moment because they finally feel like, no, we're not the crazy fundies that you like to make fun of. No, we were practicing something that we felt we were commanded to by a prophet of a prophet that you also recognize as a prophet, and that they continued to practice this principle. Anthony Ivins was his name, the gentleman who told people continue the principle no matter what. So they had apostolic permission in some levels to do this, and so that's all they were doing is they felt like they were obeying the higher law.
Yeah, I know when like the original manifesto came out, it almost I like to characterize it as this, and maybe it's wrong for me to say it like this, but I almost feel like the members of the church were like, wink, wink, right? Because you're just saying that for like the government, right? Like,
Mhm.
and that's
Absolutely.
why a second manifesto had to be put out 14 years later or so. But like
Mhm.
it gets kind of messy because I read it's a short revelation. You can read it online. Everyone should read it online. They have it on, unless I didn't read the whole thing, but it's only like a page long. And
Yeah, it's very short. And
yeah,
I encourage people to watch my episode where polygamist Benjamin Schaefer reads it because he looks just like Brigham Young with his long beard, and he reads the Revelation. It's like, man, I feel like I'm transported to the 19th century.
that's funny. And I understand it as I mean, so the story as I know it. So John Taylor's son, being a member of the Quorum of the 12, was one of the more pro polygamous people, as you mentioned. And when Wilford Woodruff and the rest of the Quorum of the, or the first presidency kind of said, release the manifesto, he was kind of one of the ones that's like, oh, this is wink, wink, nod, nod, keep going. And then when they were like, no, no, it's not, they took him out of the Quorum of the 12. He continued to practice it, and then they excommunicated him. And from what I understand, that's kind of the first main moment where he like was like, no, look, this is from my father. This is a revelation from him. It's going to be eternal. But what I gather, and a lot of this is just speculation, is how could we possibly know because we weren't there, right? And I hate history for that reason because it's so much speculation. But it seems to me that like the leaders of the church and others didn't believe that actually was from John Taylor. Any thoughts there? Or do you, because from what I understand, isn't it more recent that they're like, oh, this does match his handwriting, where in the past they're like, no, it's a forgery kind of a thing? Or was it, or am
Uh,
I missing something to this story?
you know what? I would love to have you talk to some historians who are better versed on it, but no, it was pretty well understood that this was
His
real.
handwriting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it was understood. So I think they understood what this was. I think that the church would later try to do public stuff where they distance themselves from it. But I think now, I mean, the fact that it's acknowledged by the church, it yeah, sure hasn't been acknowledged by the Quorum of the 12 of the First Presidency, but it's been published in the church catalog, and they don't do that lightly. That's a lot of thought and stuff that they're putting into that. And if there was any thought that that was a fake or a forgery, it would not find its way into the catalog. And I think
Well,
you got
now they believe it's
no.
real now. I'm talking about back in the day.
Well, that's the thing though, is that you part of it is if you want a document to be authenticated, if they found this document 10 years ago, then we would have to think, is this a Hoffman forgery? We know
Yeah.
that this document has existed for a long period of time. We had many people, including the son of the prophet, attest to this being him. Okay, and so this was all knowledge to the Quorum of the 12.
Well, but you
This
have
this
the son
all
of the prophet who is leaving the church and saying, "No, like I should be practicing polygamy. See, this is what my dad wrote." And they're like, oh, "Okay." So I don't
uh,
know. Just some of these, like some of the stuff about the pretended, like maybe they knew it was real, but like maybe they legitimately thought that it was just made up, and because they didn't have
no.
like forensic
Well, I will
handwriting
say
about this.
we have people on record that publicly say that it's not real, but then we have minutes where they were it's shown that it was real. So
Okay.
there's information, and I can't give you names, but I just know that there are people, apostles, that knew that these were true, but publicly they said something differently. And again, this is a time when they're afraid that the government could come in and take all their stuff. If they don't clamp down on this stuff, there's still that.
Right.
And that you have the whole
Seizing property was on the line.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You had the Reed Smoot hearings going on during this period of time where they didn't want to seat a senator. So that's still a very difficult thing. So again, this is an example of the church saying one thing publicly and doing something differently. Is something that we see with the manifesto. We even see that with the original Daves of polygamy, where they were saying one thing publicly and doing something differently privately. So to me, it's like that just follows the same pattern. When they're dealing with polygamy, they follow this pattern almost to a T.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back on some of that. I would like to see any of that evidence if you find some about them knowing that it wasn't, like that knowing it was authentic, because that'd be interesting. Because that does it does seem interesting. But like a lot of this stuff though, like when they released the manifesto in 1890, they're not expecting people to get divorced. They're not expecting to. There's kind of like a waning off. I feel like that should be expected, and especially because like the communication obviously was much different back then. Took a while to get things up north in Canada where we had people. Took a while to get things to California, down to Mexico. Also, they had different laws too. And as you said, there's like some ambiguity there. It's like, wait, are they just saying this for the United States? Do we keep doing it down in this country? Communication was a big deal. So to me, it makes a lot of sense that it would take a while to actually get out of the system. But anyway,
Yeah.
if you could send that to me, that'd be great. But
Yeah, that's one thing. But again, Anthony Ivins was down in Mexico in the 1890s and in the early 1900s, making it very clear that this principles be practiced no matter what. So and then people are coming down to Mexico specifically to be sealed. So I mean,
right, yeah.
that was that they had enough communication to know that they could go down to Mexico to get their marriages sealed.
Okay, fair enough. And the one thing though that is interesting, and again, there's so much speculation here though, with anything history. I just have to keep saying that because I don't like history for that very reason. But the one thing that is interesting though, so let's assume, that this, well, not assume, like this is in his handwriting. This is a John Taylor revelation. Well, it actually doesn't contradict anything I feel like that the church is even talking about today. The difference is that once Wilford Woodruff et al. And the first presidency took over, is they now had the jurisdiction, if you will, to make the decision on what was going to happen with polygamy. And so people needed to respect the authority of the priesthood under President Wilford Woodruff. And I don't think that what President Wilford Woodruff did contradicts anything in the revelation from John Taylor or anything now. The revelation from John Taylor doesn't really contradict anything now. I think the fundamental difference here is the use of that revelation, and maybe this is, maybe it wasn't pretended because it was a real revelation, but pretended in the sense of how it's been interpreted, because using it as an excuse to still practice polygamy, I think is incorrect, because President Woodruff was
Right.
now the prophet. And
It's
so, and
it,
it doesn't say that you
you
have to practice it on the earth.
you have
Anyway,
to
keep going.
you have to look at it from the perspective of fundamentalists, that they believe that when the
Sure.
church finally started cracking down on what they considered to be an eternal principle, they considered the church on some level has apostatized. So that's the
Right.
fundamentalist perspective. And so and again, if a let's just say that President Nelson went to you today and commanded you to practice, no matter what the church is teaching this right now, this is a true principle, and you need to continue this practice. Like, and then 5 years from now, the church changes this doctrine, and President Nelson's dead. Some people might confoul the first presidency. Others would be like, "Hey,
Yep.
I was commissioned by the prophet to do this." And so, what is the role of a prophet, seer, and revelator? If and if he felt, and this, the interpretation with the fundamentalists is that they were set apart. So it wasn't like they were looking for an excuse to practice polygamy. They were set
Yeah.
apart
Called
to
to do it.
continue the principle, but that was commissioned by them in their theology. They're commissioned by John Taylor to continue the principle no matter what. And so they're just following what they think is an important thing, and so they don't look at it as an excuse, or that that they want to do it. They think this is really an important thing, and there's a lot of church teachings in the 19th century that talk about the importance of having plural wives. And so they're just practicing what the original three prophets of the church taught and believed.
Yeah. I
And
think
I think for them, that they break off. They think you guys broke off from them.
right. Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I think the difference though is like, let's get back to this example. Like President Nelson's like, you need to practice polygamy, polygamy. Okay, and I take on multiple wives. I would hate to do this. This is why it's an Abrahamic test, people, because It's not fun. It's not a like it very much pushes the boundaries. I think it's supposed to be an Abrahamic test. That's the lens we should look at it as. Abraham was commanded to kill his son Isaac. That is like against what you would expect God to command. Anyway, so let's say President Nelson says, you got to practice polygamy, Rylan. Okay. And it's an eternal principle. You need to practice it. Okay. I take on multiple wives. President Nelson dies. Well, the difference is, and then like the new prophet, which would be President Oaks, is next in line. So let's say President Oaks comes out and he's like, no, we're like, no more polygamy. Okay. Well, then I can do both. I can continue. I'm not going to just divorce all my wives. But the difference is President Oaks is saying not to continue it. So like I can still be true to President Nelson
Okay.
and stick with
I guess
my
that's
wives and leave it
right.
forever. But I would be wrong to teach teach my
Okay.
children, you need to have multiple wives because now I'm not respecting the authority of, well, in this case, President Oaks, but
Well,
it'd be President
just
Woodruff,
just
right?
just
So
tell that to all the wives that were divorced during this period of time.
yeah,
They were
well,
forced,
I,
so
I
there were a
understand
lot of
that they
women.
weren't forcing people to get divorced, and like it wasn't like everyone said, like you still had to retain your families. You know what I mean? It wasn't like everyone just like you, because you can't just go from polygamy to nothing instantly.
But there were cases when that did happen.
Sure,
So
cases, yeah, but
yeah.
I don't think that was from what I understand at least. It wasn't expected that people would just like abandon their families like that. I do know, and speaking of which, when we talked at the beginning with the lady in my mom's ward back in the day who like remembers her grandpa's a polygamist,
Yeah.
I believe she did talk about, because I think it was probably when polygamy was waning down. I don't think she's that old. I think there's like stories about that where it's like polygamy's ending, and okay, I don't want to like misrepresent her because like it was like part of the story was when polygamy was ending and the difficulties of like, well, I still have families, and she kind of talked about that waning off of polygamy over time. Anyway, but polygamy is such a fascinating topic. You as a non-member, like you got to be just fascinated with polygamy, I would imagine, right? Is this like one of
You
your
know
like?
what? That's the funniest thing. I would say of all the subjects I'm least versed in, it's polygamy. I never really studied it that much. I've probably learned more about polygamy since it's probably the one subject of Mormonism that I've learned more about since I started the channel has been polygamy. So this is still fresh and fresh. I'm learning a lot of new and interesting things.
It's a
So
sensitive topic, I feel like,
yeah, yeah,
because
I feel so.
well,
I
and what do
agree.
you think about? I mean, we kind of talked about this over the phone. That revelation from John Taylor. I just mentioned. I don't think it contradicts anything that the church teaches today. I think it's pretty in line with Section 132.
Well,
And
I think that a person who is a 19th century Latter-day Saint would look at that in a different lens than a 21st century Mormon.
well, but what I'm saying though, I think what you're getting at is the polygamy versus monogamy and what everlasting covenant means. Well, I would say that everlasting covenant would also include polygamy because, like we talked about, President Nelson technically has two wives.
He's a polygamist. Yep.
That
Mhm.
fits into the everlasting covenant, right? The
Mhm.
difference is we're not practicing it in mortality right now, right? And so like it's still there, I think. So anyway, and
Yeah.
that, yeah, I don't know.
And
What do you think?
there are others like the AUB and other groups that say, "Hey, your church is great. We love it. Send out the missionaries, spread the Book of Mormon, and then when people want to find their way into our church to practice the eternal principle, here we are."
The AUB, what's the AUB?
AUB, the Apostolic United Brethren.
Oh, okay.
They're like I think they're the largest polygamous group. Yeah, and you got
Okay.
that's the Allred group,
Okay.
and I've had Allred's granddaughter. That's Cody Brown's and Sister Wives group. So you have these polygamous groups that actually the FLDS is an outlier. This is not mainstream Mormon fundamentalism. It's an outlier. It's an extremist sect. There are many mainstream like people that are members of the AUB or mostly independent Mormons or members of your church that practice the principles. So there's actually, I think
Yeah.
now there are more people practicing polygamy in Utah now than there were in the 19th century.
No way.
Yep.
No, I had to think about that one. I don't know about that, sir. That's a bold
Look
statement.
it up.
That's fascinating.
I'm pretty sure there's more now than there was in the 19th
Hey,
century. Just
I
think how
went.
much smaller you. But again, think how much smaller Utah and the population was
Oh,
then.
okay,
So it's
okay. You're talking like raw numbers, not percentage. Okay.
yeah, numerically,
Numerically,
numerically.
that might be true because I mean they have a lot of kids. So I guess shout out. I used to live in southern Utah, and I would see polygamous wives always at Costco buying a lot of
Uh-huh.
food and stuff, and I always thought it was fun to see them. So if they're watching this, hello. I hope you're enjoying the Costco of St. George. It's a beautiful place down there, and
I'd love to get
yeah,
down there.
all but love. You know, all the love.
Love it. Well, hey, Rylan, I just want to say I really appreciated this conversation we had today, and I'm so glad you had me on tonight.
Yeah, and so you can find Stephen Pynakker at Mormon Book Reviews. Go give him a follow on his channel.
Yeah,
And
YouTube. And I'm gonna be taping an interview with the John G. Turner, the latest from Yale University Press, the newest Joseph Smith biography.
yep,
I'll be taping that tomorrow and probably releasing it sometime this week. So we have some really interesting guests, and we're going to be tackling the Godmakers cartoon. We're going to be tackling polygamy some more. We're going to be tackling a lot of current issues and also just history and theology of the church. That's what we do here at MBR, and we do it in a way that's kind and done in such a way that can be informative and even edifying.
yep. And I love it. I'm a big fan. NBR all the way. And I think yeah, we'll end it there. Thanks for joining
It's
on.
good. Awesome.